Nowadays, if we look at the rev-happy king of the American V8s, Chevrolet currently holds that record close to their belt with their new high-tech 5.5-liter flat-plane crank V8 that found itself inside of a new C8 Z06 Corvette. With a red line of 8,600 RPM, that is seriously in exotic car territory for a domestic V8. But decades ago in the 1960s, there was no such thing as a flat-plane crank in an American production V8. Yet GM still managed to build one of the ultimate small block screamers without any of that fancy modern tech. Just a good set of heads, a short stroke, and one of the most legendary cams of all time. That was the race-bred combination that gave us the legendary DZ302, the 302 cubic inch small block Chevy that was built specifically for homologation purposes within the SCCA Trans Am series. Fitted only in the Z28 Camaros, this engine quickly garnered a reputation for punching well above its weight class and giving us one of the most heavenly sounds of all time. So, how the heck did Chevy beat Ford at their own 302 cubic inch small block game? Well, here is how the story goes. The SCCA Trans Am Racing Series burst onto the scene in 1966, before the Camaro was even out, and it was a meteoric success. And the Ford Mustangs, prepped by Carroll Shelby himself, were dominating the series. 327 cubic inch small block in the series because it was too big. The next best engine that Chevy had was the 283, but that left too much on the table in terms of displacement to be considered a viable option for this application. Vince Piggins, the person who was at the time in charge of making Chevrolet relevant in performance circles to boost their public persona, was the man tasked with overseeing the Camaro's triumphant entrance into the Trans Am series. And the first stroke of genius that he had, no pun intended, was to essentially marry the 327 and 283 motors together. See, by using the 4-inch cylinder bore of the 327 small block and the 3-inch stroke of the 283 small block, Chevy could effectively reduce the displacement of this new motor to 302.4 cubic inches, thus just skating under that 305 cubic inch max displacement limit. This short stroke change not only made this motor now viable for the Trans Am series, but it also gave it the characteristics that it needed to be a high RPM screamer. By creating an engine setup that had what was called an over-square bore, a bore larger than the stroke, that means effectively the piston has less distance to travel when the crankshaft is rotating, which means that there is not only less friction for the piston, but larger, better flowing valves can also be accommodated. Now, there's a lot of technical jargon that goes into all this engineering, but the best explanation on this phenomenon is from a great channel called Engineering Explained, which I'm sure you have seen before. In their video breakdown, they explain the following that best encapsulates how this all works. The over-square engine with its short stroke is able to rev very high without extreme piston speed, which shortens the life of piston rings. Given a maximum piston speed of 25 meters per second, the hypothetical over-square engine could rev out to 16,000 RPM, where a square engine, which has the same bore and stroke, could rev out to 8,700 RPM. And an undersquare engine, which has a larger stroke than bore, could max out at just about 4,700 RPM. The basic physics behind Chevy's race-bred 302 were strong, as were its internals. Chevrolet started with a reinforced small block casting, tough enough to handle the high RPM abuse that this engine was designed for. The 1967 version featured a small journal block, but in 1968, Chevrolet upgraded to a large journal design for better durability. By 1969, the block was further strengthened with thicker main webbing and 4-bolt main caps, improving its ability to withstand the extreme racing conditions it was designed to face. Now, a high-revving engine needs a strong bottom end, and Chevrolet delivered with a forged steel crank that was hardened through tough riding for improved wear resistance. The 1967 models used small journals, but in 68 and 69, as previously mentioned, Chevrolet switched to larger journals, which reduced some of the stress on the rotating assembly. The connecting rods also evolved over time. The 67 models had smaller rod bolts and a pressed wrist pin design. But in 1968, Chevrolet introduced stronger rods with 3/8-inch bolts. And later that year, they switched to a floating wrist pin setup, reducing friction and improving reliability at high RPM, which was a design that carried into 1969 for the 302 as well. Compression was a key factor in the 302's performance. Early 1967 and 1968 pistons had a domed design borrowed from the 327 350 horsepower variant with dual valve reliefs. Later, in 1968, Chevy introduced that floating wrist pin design, and by 69, they upgraded to impact extruded pistons with slipper skirts, and they maintained a wicked 11-to-1 compression ratio while improving durability. To make serious power at the high RPM, the 302 relied on the high-flow cylinder heads that it had, with a large 2.02-inch intake and 1.6-inch exhaust valves. Early designs featured Chevrolet's signature double hump casting with minor updates in 68 and 69 to accommodate sensor and mounting changes. But for every good set of heads, you're gonna need a good cam, and in this case, it was the legendary 3030 solid lifter camshaft. With aggressive lift and duration, it provided precise valve timing, keeping the engine pulling hard up to and even past 7,000 RPM. And unlike hydraulic lifters, which could pump up and cause valve float, these solid lifters ensured valve train stability at extreme speeds, which was perfect for Trans Am racing, where those high RPMs would be sustained pretty much all race. For induction, Chevy fitted the 302 with a single 4-barrel aluminum high-rise intake manifold designed to optimize airflow for high RPM power. An optional over-the-counter cross-ram dual 4-barrel intake was also available for those who needed even more power, allowing the use of 2 carburetors. A killer setup for racing, though wickedly impractical for the street. Everything about the 302 was built with one thing in mind: winning races. It may not have had the sheer torque of a big block, but once that tax started to climb past 5,000 RPM, the 302 came alive, delivering a sound and performance almost unmatched for the era. Chevrolet officially rated the 302 at 290 horsepower at 5,800 RPM and 290 foot-pounds of torque at 4,200 RPM. However, those numbers were considered extremely conservative. On a dyno, the same engines produced nearly 350 horsepower at 7,000 RPM. And in full race trim, the Trans Am versions were putting out around 450 horsepower. This small block was more than just an engine, it was a weapon. It was built to rev higher, breathe better, and outlast the competition. It may not have had the raw torque of a big block, but in the right hands and at the right RPM, it was nearly unstoppable. In the Trans Am series by 1968, the Z28 Camaros powered by this new 302 were a dominant force. Of the 13 season races in 68, the Z28s won 10 of them. It was a slaughter, and Chevrolet won the series with 90 points to their name, compared to Ford in second place with a measly 59 points. In 1969, the Camaros were once again victorious in the Trans Am series. However, by this time, Ford had launched their own new Boss 302 as their newest tool to fight against the Z28. Even still though, Chevy clinched a series win with 78 points. While the 302 saw a majority of its success in the Trans Am series, there were still plenty of people who raced their streetcar Z28s light to light here in America with great success. That little 302 was able to upset a lot of those heavier big block powered cars when it had some work done to it. There is a ton of hype around these motors, and some would say that it's unjustified, but I would disagree. Taking one look at the Z28 Camaro's SCCA record with these engines pretty much should tell you all that you need to know. It was, without a doubt, a serious force to be reckoned with, and they are also now seriously expensive. Only 28,000 Z28s were built from 67 to 69. So if you want a piece of that 302 experience,